Okay. Welcome, everybody. We are underway. This is, of course, a Parlor Car Chat, part of the program by the San Luis Obispo Railroad Museum. And we put up this slide first just so you know that, and so that you know there's a way to donate to the museum if you are so inclined. They basically have had no operating type income for more than a year now, so if this is something that scoots your tutor and you'd like to support them, that would be great. In a minute here, I'll introduce today's speaker. It's not me, but before I do that, I want to remind everybody, or tell you if you haven't seen this before, on freeconferencecall.com, which is the system we're using for this video chat or video meeting, online meeting. Generally speaking, during the bulk of the time when the speaker is talking, we do not let everybody else's microphones through. So, but if you do want to get someone's attention, either because you're having a problem or because you have a question for the speaker or a comment, what have you, use the chat system. And somewhere around your screen, you'll find a button for the chat system. It'll say the word chat, or it'll have that little bubble for quotes, or maybe both, like it's shown on the screen here. And if you just type in your question or message there, I will try to stay on top of that and keep our speaker notified, and so on. If you don't see any of those controls, you might have to hover over your videos where you're seeing the video on that window on your screen. You may need to hover over it to make those pop up. Okay, for today, we have, our topic is the California Short Line Railroad Association, and we have presenting that for us the executive director of the association since 2016, I think. Don, you can correct me on that if I got it wrong. So let me now try to pass to Don control of this meeting. So hang on. There's that, and there's Don, and we switch. And we'll see if he gets it okay. Don, are you doing all right?
Yeah, it took a minute to come up, but it seems to be okay. But now everything is minimized. I don't know if are you seeing my screen yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason it went to compact view when we did that. So everything went to the upper right-hand corner. All right. Now, all right, everything's back. But let's see. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes. We see the whole PowerPoint.
All right, good. So I'm going to put that in slideshow mode. Ta-da. Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody today. The California Short Line Railroad Association has been around since 1993, and I'll try to give you a good idea of what we're all about, a little bit about what short lines are about, and some of the things we're working on currently. And then we'll also, since this is a museum chat, we'll also talk about some of our events using special passenger car train consists, which I think are of interest to museum goers. So let's start by looking at the question, what is a short line? Some people may not know, or some people may not know that there's more than one definition. The Surface Transportation Board defines us as a railroad with annual operating revenue less than $39,194,876. The AAR, you can see, has some different definitions. We currently have 25 short lines in California, and they're an interesting mix of ownership. We have individually owned, we have corporate, which includes plant railroads. In other words, a railroad that's operated for a specific purpose, really just to support one customer. And then we have a number of railroads that are in holding company ownership, and this would be entities like Genesee and Wyoming or Anacostia Rail Holdings. Short lines provide the first mile and the last mile of service to their customers. At least that's our saying. What we really mean is that we serve a lot of customers typically on branch lines, what used to be branch lines of Class I railroads, and the customers depend on us for their connection to the general rail system. That's what allows them to send and receive cars all over North America, really. So we are the face of, quote unquote, the railroad to the customer. It's the short line that they call when they have a problem. It's the short line that they give their specific requirements to, like, hey, I need an extra switch next week, etc. So how much traffic are we talking about? Well, we figure we handle about 25% of the rail freight traffic in California on any given year. Now, that just means that we touch it at some point. Either it's coming in from somewhere and the Class I, which would be either the BNSF Railway or the Union Pacific Railroad, hands the short line the car, and they classify it locally and then haul it out and deliver it. Or we do the reverse. We go to the customer, pick up the car, haul it to our yard, classify it into an interchange train, and then haul the interchange train out to be picked up by the Class I. Or in some cases, we actually deliver that interchange train to one of their yards and then cut away from it and grab the cars they have for us and come back. So that's who the short lines are. But the next question is, well, who is CSLRA? Well, like I mentioned earlier, we were founded in 1993. We're a nonprofit trade association, actually an unincorporated nonprofit trade association, if you want to be technical. Our purposes are what are shown here. We promote business standards and methods for the short line industry. We engage in a lot of legislative and regulatory advocacy, and we promote public awareness of short lines. That's kind of our charter as contained in our founding documents. We hold 3 major events per year, typically. We do what people refer to as a fly-in to Sacramento, usually in the spring, although last year and again this year it's needing to be virtual. But normally we go and meet up at a hotel, huddle for a few hours, and then go over to the Capitol building in Sacramento, and then walk the halls and talk to between 30 and 40 legislators or legislative staffs about what our current issues are. Secondly, we have an annual meeting. Pretty much all associations or nonprofits have to have an annual meeting, if for no other reason than to do the annual business that you have to do, electing officers, electing board members, etc. But we do that, but we also have a lot of informational sessions there. Sometimes we do those in conjunction with the Federal Railroad Administration. They will send in specialists, and we're essentially sponsoring an FRA seminar on a wide variety of topics that might have to do with managing hours of service or track inspections, or it really could just be a whole host of different things that we might look at. And then our fall train trip is something that we do every year, and we'll go into a little more detail about that later. This picture, by the way, is a night shot taken at Pacific Harbor Line. Since I used to work there, I took the liberty of using that as a feature photo. I believe this one was used as part of a magazine shoot probably 10 years ago, something like that. So let's go back to legislative and regulatory advocacy. I'm going to give you a good flavor for this. In fact, I'm going to kind of take a deep dive into one issue here because there's something happening right now that I think everybody needs to know about. On the federal side, sort of our perennial issues, seems like, you know, somebody brings it up every year and we have to deal with it. There's always an effort in Congress to raise truck size and weight. We have to continually oppose that. It forces, because some truck hauls are very, very closely competitive with rail, with the price of one versus the other kind of going like this as the market changes. What that does is it forces truck traffic more truck traffic onto the highways, tears up the road, tears up the bridges, causes accidents, etc. So for those reasons and for business reasons, we always oppose that. The feds, somebody's always wanting to tinker with crew size, kind of shades of the old feather bedding from the 1940s and 1950s. Our position is that we want to see crew size determined through collective bargaining, and that the government should keep its nose out of it. The other issue that we seem to see almost every year is this idea of forced access, which is an STB thing that's been getting batted around for years, really. Some captive shippers, in other words, shippers that are served by only one Class 1 railroad, feel that they're not getting good rates. So what they want to do is, by law, have those plants that are currently isolated with only one railroad access be allowed to have other railroads come in and access them. Now, if you think about that, who's maintaining that track, the signaling, the structures, etc.? Well, it's that one railroad that serves the plant. So you're going to tell them that they still have to do that, but then they have to let their competitors come in and compete for the traffic as well. Needless to say, that doesn't sit very well with us. So that's another issue that we find ourselves tussling with every year. On the state side, currently we have something called the In-Use Locomotive Regulation before the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. And I'm going to talk in some detail about that here in a minute. We're also dealing with indirect source rules from the air districts that have to do with what you can do with rail yards and warehousing and so on. And then we're always dealing with bills that go into areas of corporate taxes and personnel management. Somebody always wants to slap on a new tax for some pet project. The thing you see on the right of your screen here that says Making Tracks California is just an example of a one-page handout that we usually take with us when we go to visit legislator offices. This particular one was used last year for what turned out to be virtual outreach, but we try to distill everything down to a single page. Just what are we currently supporting, what are we opposing at the state level, and just a reminder of who we are and what we do. So I'm going to go into more detail on this in-use locomotive regulation because I think it's something that everybody in the railroading community in California should be aware of, and it does actually affect museums and tourist passenger operators. They're squarely in the sights of this thing, and I'll go into more detail about that. The Governor's executive order of this number in 7920 requires that 100% zero-emission vehicles in the off-road vehicles category by 2035. There's a caveat where feasible, but that doesn't seem to come into play very much. The interesting thing is that railroad locomotives are considered off-road vehicles. So the Air Resources Board has responded with a notice and a first draft regulation that they intend to start the approval process on early next year. At the same time, the air districts are doing their own thing. And who are the air districts? Well, they're people like the South Coast Air Quality Management District that presides over essentially the LA basin, kind of that 5-county area. Anyway, they're proceeding with their own ideas about things they want railroads to do, limiting total criteria pollutant output from various facilities if necessary by simply throttling the amount of traffic that goes through them, putting in very expensive exhaust scrubbers every place that locomotives are maintained. So they're and this is going on simultaneously with what CARB wants. The last bullet here is quite true. The combined cost of these measures will financially cripple most California short lines, and that also applies to industrial and agricultural car switching operators and museum and tourist passenger railroads. And many of us are going to go out of business if CARB doesn't change course on this. So here are the details. The proposed regulation would do these things, and the regulation's not very long, and you can find it just by putting proposed in-use locomotive regulation in California into your search engine. Anyway, the regulation would put a yearly, they call it a fee, but we're calling it a tax, a yearly tax on each existing locomotive in operation into what they call locomotive spending accounts. And the older the locomotive is, the higher the payment is. From what we've been able to determine, like a Tier 2, EPA Tier 2 locomotive would require payments of at least $200,000 a year. So if you assume what our average short line fleet size is in California, which is 8 locomotives, that becomes $1.6 million a year that has to go into this fund. Then the real kicker, locomotives are going to have a max, if this goes through, they'll have a max of 23 years to operate in California, and it's retroactive. And this example I show you, a new $1.6 million Tier 3 unit placed in operation in 2010 must be retired by 2033, and nothing less than Tier 4 may operate after 2030. So that's all, that goes squarely at museum and tourist operators. None of them can afford that kind of thing, and besides the whole point of an operating museum is to show vintage equipment in operation. All new locomotive purchases have to be Tier 4 or higher starting in 2023, and we make the cost of those to be $2 to $2.8 million a piece. Battery hydrogen prototypes, I put Tier 5 in quotations because the Tier 5 standard really isn't out yet. But anyway, that's the true ZEV designs are going to be $7 to $11 million. I mean, hugely expensive. And oh, by the way, they also want new rules on locomotive idling. So this is all going on, and yet railroads only contribute 2.1% of greenhouse gases within the U.S. transportation sector. Cars, light trucks, and motorcycles contribute 59.8% of greenhouse gases, but under the executive order, you've probably heard this flashy announcement that new car sales in California have to be zero emission by 2035, but existing vehicles are left to operate. And there's also no DMV rule change concerning classic or antique cars, so gas-powered vehicles 1975 model year or older can still skip their smog checks and still keep operating. So that's kind of inconsistent with what they're asking the railroads to do. Trucking contributes 23.5% of GHGs, but the EO gives medium and heavy-duty trucks, which are our direct competitors, until 2045 to go zero emission. Then there's aviation, which contributes just under 9% of GHGs, and there's no attempt to regulate air freight in this executive order. So, and lastly, it's worth noting that within California locomotive emissions, short line locomotives contribute only 2% of particulate 2.5 size and nitrogen oxides at NOx. Those are the primary, what they call criteria pollutants that everybody's concerned about. So all these regulations are proposed to apply to a source that's only causing 2% of the problem. So we very much have an economic dilemma. And most companies guard their balance sheet information as proprietary. So you can't just go ask a short line, hey, give me all your financials, particularly if you want to put them into the public record. And that's not just true of railroads, it's pretty much true of businesses generally. But we can derive a proxy for what the situation is, just to show you how bad it is. Recent Association of American Railroad statistics show 1,021,100 total carloads per year handled by California short lines. So if there's 25 short lines, you divide that out, and that's a median figure of 40,844 carloads per railroad. And if we assume that the railroads are paid $250 per carload, which is just kind of an average number, then the average annual revenue for a median short line is $10,211,000. One of the industry thumb rules is that a well-run short line will consume 80% of revenue with expenses, meaning labor, fuel, locomotives, track, upkeep, etc., which would leave $2 million and change in income after those expenses are paid. So with the average fleet of 8 units, 8 units at $200,000 a unit paid into CARB is $1.6 million, and that's against $2 million in net income. I think you can see how much a problem that is. To use another method, some short lines who will remain nameless are known to have recently averaged $8.4 million in annual income. Again, using the 80% rule, that would give them about $1.68 million in net income. And again, you put that against the CARB fee of $1.6 million for 8 locomotives, and they've got almost no profit at all. And remember that these numbers assume only normal expenses, nothing in the way of special projects such as upgrading rail weight to improve track speed or weight bearing capability. The engine idling requirements, the CARB data reporting requirements, they, of course, being a government, they have to have lots of data that they want us to produce. Ongoing need to replace units because of the 23-year life limit, and then the air district rules, all that together is just going to crush most of these companies and put them in insolvency. And kind of a bottom line is that we can't help green the transportation sector if we don't survive. So this says the ask because this slide would typically be used in front of a legislator. We're trying to get members of the state assembly and senate to get involved. Right now they're kind of standing off to the side and letting CARB do whatever it wants to do. And we are pointing out that short lines, car switchers, railroad museums are not being treated evenly compared to other segments of the transportation sector. And again, that may require, fixing that may require the legislator to get involved. And again, not to belabor it, but lots of bad things are going to happen if short lines are forced out of business. And as an aside, working with some other associations, we the Short Line Association a few days ago did actually send CARB staff a request that the legislation, or that the regulation exempt operating museums and tourist passenger operators. And I'll just put this last item here. If you want to support the effort to get an exemption for museums and tourist passenger operators, and who do I mean by that? Well, of course, I mean the State Museum at Sacramento, the Wine Train, the Big Trees operation, the ATSF 3751, the Pacific Southwest Railway Museum. All of those folks have operations in their profiles, and all of that would get shut down under these rules. Heck, even the train circling Disneyland and the train at Knott's Berry Farm couldn't operate anymore under these proposed rules. So anyway, if you think that's a bad idea, you could always send a note to freight@arb.ca.gov. Simply ask if they support the notion of an exemption for these. The rest of us are going to have to work this out through a very complicated process. The rest of us being the Class 1s and the short lines, but maybe we can get the museums and the tourist operators just flat exempted, and then that would at least solve that problem. We can pause at this point. I'm not, because I'm full screen here, I'm not seeing any questions or anything. So am I missing anything?
No, Don, we don't have any chat questions come through or anything, so I'd say plow on.
Okay, I will plow on. So let's set all that negativity aside and go back to these fall train trips that we've been having every year for probably 10 years. So some of the reasons to have a trip like that: fundraising. Our membership field includes the railroads themselves, and then all of the vendors that sell stuff to railroads, whether it be track, locomotive maintenance, signaling, parts, personnel services, fuel, whatever it is. There's a huge ecosystem of vendors that exist alongside the short line railroads, and so they're typically quite interested in sponsorship. Sometimes the railroads are too. So it's a good fundraising opportunity for the railroad members. It's a good opportunity for them to bring a few of their big customers along and kind of give them a fun day away from the office, and in the process also hopefully increase their understanding of railroading a little bit more. And it also facilitates a lot of discussion. You get out there in a consist of 3, 5, 6 cars, and everybody spreads out, and some of the cars have small areas that are very conducive to conferences, and then if you walk the train, you will always find some people talking business in this corner or that corner. But at the end, it's also fun. So that's a major reason for doing it. That previous picture, by the way, was a BNSF special train in San Diego. Let's talk a little bit about routes and equipment. We've done our trips with private cars on the back of Amtrak between Emeryville and Reno, and we've done essentially that same route on UP special equipment between Sacramento and Reno. A little bit shorter trip, but still very nice. We have also run BNSF specials between LA and San Diego, and here's a different BNSF train at the lower left shown in San Diego. And I put that little red, white, and blue ribbon on there as a reminder that I think it was in 2018, our trip happened to, well, it coincided with two things. It coincided with the American Shortline and Regional Railroad Association's one of their annual meetings in San Diego. So we invited their members to join us on this trip, so it was a bit bigger than usual. Secondly, it was Veterans Day, so we made the trip into a Veterans Day special and provided special recognition for military veterans who were participating in the event. And then most recently, which would have been 2019, because we couldn't run last year because of COVID, we did actually run a UP special between Los Angeles and San Luis Obispo. So perhaps if any of you were in the local area there, you might have actually seen this train. That's a photo of the station at SLO. We typically did souvenir timetables for these trips, and I'll show you. I'll finish up by showing you a couple of those. This is what we call the Shortline Express timetable. It was used in 2017. This was an Oakland to Reno trip on the back of Amtrak, and you can see that it lists the cars that we chartered to be in that contest. We had the Silver Lariat, and which is essentially a dome diner. We had the Silver Solarium, which is a rear of train dome observation car, and we had the Overland Trail, and then we also had the Skyview. So that was a nice, very nice consist to ride in. You can see this is kind of the schedule that we used. We were leaving, or it was boarding in Emeryville at 9, and then we were hopefully in Reno realistically we were in Reno probably by 5 o'clock. Now the interesting point is that if you look at the route there on the right, you can see the stop in Reno, and if you know anything about Reno these days, you know that that's a place where they built the trench. So the tracks are depressed down into a trench, which is a lot like the Alameda Corridor in Los Angeles. So when you arrive at the station, you're probably 30 feet below street level in an open trench, and there are no sidings, no place to go. So what you have to do is unload the passengers there, and then the train continues on to Sparks, Nevada, which you can see as the last marked point on the map there. And at Sparks, the Amtrak has to do a set out. They have to stop the train, set off the rear cars, and then do a quick air test and take off. And then Union Pacific has to switch the cars out for us, hold them at Sparks overnight, and then the next morning when the Amtrak heading west comes in, they have to stop the train, and then UP had to switch the cars onto the rear of the train. They had to again do an air test and then take off. So kind of an involved process, and it's something that's really not possible at all anymore under current Amtrak rules, and based on the fact that UP has found it to be too troublesome. So this type of route is something we actually can't do anymore. And you can see that the return trip, we left at about 8:30 in the morning, and we were back at Emeryville probably about 4:30. So nice long trip in both directions. People would ride. A lot of people would ride only in one direction, either out or back. Although you could also ride out, stay the night in Reno, and then ride back the next morning. And then there were always a lot of sponsored dinners in Reno for those that were staying, again, to facilitate discussion between railroads and vendors primarily. So Here's another schedule that I'll show you, and this is the schedules for that trip in 2019. You can see that this one ran between Burbank, actually the airport station at Burbank, and SLO. And this was a little bit shorter trip. Very, very nice UP special train consist on this one. They had the City of San Francisco, which was which is a Dome lounge car. We had the City of Portland, Dome Diner, the City of Los Angeles, the Colorado Eagle, the Little Rock, and then and the Omaha, which was for the crew car, and then there's a power car also because the locomotives no longer have the locomotives that they were using were freight locomotives, so there's no head-in power, so you have to have a power car to provide the head-in power for all the passenger cars to plug into, if that makes sense. So, and you can see the note at the lower right there about sponsors. You know, again, sponsorships are a big deal on these trips. You know, they are a fundraiser. And then here's the actual route of the train. This is a beautiful coastal route, and we always try to highlight. You know, we don't like to make announcements when the train is rolling, but we do like to give people all this reference material on what they're seeing. So with that, I will turn it back over, and we can see about some questions.
Okay, let me do a couple of things here. I'll take back control and turn on some microphones. And if hopefully it won't get too noisy when I do that. We'll see. Okay, so we are open for questions here.
So I have a question. My name's Charlie Crabb, and I've been involved with the Swanton Pacific Railroad for a number of years. Those are the locomotives from the 1915 Pan-Pacific International Exhibition, 1/3 scale steam locomotives that are over 100 years old. So what you're telling us, Don, is that something like Swanton Pacific wouldn't be able to operate those steam locomotives anymore?
Well, it depends. The rule as it is currently written is based, it has an exemption in it that's based on horsepower, and that's all it says is horsepower. And so the question is, are the horsepower ratings of those locomotives less than 1,006 horsepower? If they are, then you would get by on that exemption.
Okay.
If not, if the horsepower rating is higher, then yeah, you're going to get scooped up in that same net.
Okay.
And this is Gary. Along those lines, what happens to all the museums? They can no longer operate, like Orange Empire and down in Campo. All of those historic locomotives just couldn't be run at all, or
that's correct.
Could they be? Okay. So,
that's correct.
So is this legislation or regulations? Is it really just pie in the sky by carb to try to? Are they trying to set the goalpost way down so they can compromise back to something that they would think is reasonable, even though it still might be onerous? Or are they really serious about all of this? I guess I'm trying to calibrate myself to how likely is this, or is it just a negotiation tool?
Oh, they're very serious.
Okay.
I mean, appreciate that that CARB is part of the executive branch, so it works for the government, or for the government, the governor.
Yes.
The governor writes an executive order. That's an order to those staffies to go do what he wants. So, and it appears that nobody wants to tell the governor that his order is flawed.
Oh, okay. Is this one of those unintended consequences? Nobody thought of it at first when he proposed it, or?
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure it is. Sometimes I wonder if he even knew that locomotives were part of the group off-road vehicles.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. It's just they're off the road, but it doesn't seem like the kind of thing you would normally expect. I mean, stationary power generating and stuff, you've got lots of options with electrical and solar and all sorts of things. But things that have wheels and are moving around, albeit not on a road, obviously your options it's way more awkward to put solar panels on a locomotive and make it any kind of thing practical, for example. So now you got to put batteries.
Right.
You got to have enough power to pull a long train, blah, blah, blah. Well, obviously, I'm preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
One other question is, you talked about the Amtrak rules for private cars making the Reno trip not possible, but couldn't you do a Reno trip with the host railroad UP providing the power and having it be a special?
Yes, that we can still do, but Amtrak's private car rules are very onerous now. They came in with the last administration. So far, there's been no move to rescind these new rules. And basically, if you want to run a private car out of Emeryville, you can do it, but the car has to go all the way to Chicago.
Yes.
So that's the only option left to private car owners now, is to run these very long routes between points where Amtrak will still handle the cars. And as you may know, a lot of private car owners sold their cars when these rules came in a few years back.
So you'd have to sit in Reno for 3 or 4 days while the car went all the way to Chicago and came back, which obviously wouldn't be practical.
Yeah.
And pay for
it. Yeah, you have to pay for all those empty miles. Yeah, so it's hugely expensive to boot.
So does CSLA have what's the next trip planned, or do you even have one at this point?
Well, we have a trip that we were not able to do because of the pandemic. We were going to spend a day on the wine train, something we've not done before, and we are still going to try to do that this fall if it works out. I just talked to the wine train less than a week ago. They are in the process now of maintaining their equipment, inspecting and getting their track back up to running standards, recalling people, and they hope that they'll be allowed to reopen maybe sometime in May. So we'll see.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, let's see. One last comment then. Let me see if I can share this screen again. Oh, I guess not. Never mind. Next 2 weeks from today, our next topic. Oh, by the way, before I get on to that, Don, thank you very much for doing this presentation today. I'm sure people learned a lot about your association in particular and some of the things railroads are up against in general. So I want to thank you very much for doing that.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And then just before we close out, a reminder that in 2 weeks' time, our next topic will be the model railroad at the museum. Michael Burrell will be talking about that and what goes into it and who's doing what. And I'm not entirely sure what all he's going to tell us about it, but it'll be fun. So thanks all for joining us today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. You can always check the schedule at the website on the Parlor Car Chats page. All right, bye-bye.
Thanks, Don.
Jamie.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.